A humble cleaner takes the witness stand, and what she says changes everyone in the courtroom. That's how the story began to ripple through Saintbridge even before the trial. No one knew what a woman like her could possibly have to say, but everyone wanted to find out. That morning, the courtroom felt more solemn than ever. Stained glass let in a filtered, golden light, as if the sun itself had decided to attend. Chairs creaked under the weight of expectation. With every footstep echoing on the marble, heads turned. And then she appeared, almost unnoticed, pushing her cleaning cart. Grace Turner was the kind of person who seemed made of silence. She walked slowly, always watching where she stepped, as if asking the air for permission before breathing it in. The gray uniform did not hide the fatigue in her shoulders, but there was something in the way she set things straight that made the world feel in order, if only for a moment. She stopped at the courtroom door and drew a deep breath. In her uniform pocket, the folded envelope seemed to throb with her heartbeat. It was more than paper. It was memory, courage, and fear. She stepped inside. The air felt different in there, denser, almost tangible. People whispered, as if even words were afraid to echo too loudly. Judge Morales shuffled his papers, Prosecutor Reed sharpened his gaze on every detail, and the defense attorney, Cole, gestured with the confidence of a man who believes the verdict has already been written. Grace parked the cart in a corner, looked around, and recognized everything: the shine of chairs she herself had polished, the smell of disinfectant she used every morning, the wall clock ticking away seconds with the precision of a sentence. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The room obeyed, and for a moment she stood as well, not even knowing why. It was reflex, learned by the repetition of days. Only this time, something inside her knew this day would be different. The judge opened the session, and words began to fill the air like the notes of a song everyone knew too well. Testimonies, documents, arguments. Everything seemed to follow the usual script. But there was a tension no one named. The kind only a silent observer can sense. Grace was quietly wiping the corner of the jury table when she heard her name. "We'll call the next witness. Ms. Grace Turner." For a second, she thought she'd misheard. Her back went rigid, the cloth froze in the air. The bailiff repeated her name, louder. The judge lifted his curious eyes. "Ms. Turner, would you approach, please?" Faces swung toward her like a beam of light. Grace walked slowly to the center of the room, feeling the floor vibrate beneath her steps. The cart stayed behind, and the silence filled the space. "You work here at the courthouse, correct?" asked the judge. "Yes, Your Honor." "For 8 years. And do you know why you're being called today?" She hesitated. Her sweaty hands pressed together. "I think so." The prosecutor adjusted his tie, clearly irritated. "Your Honor, this witness was added at the last minute. I don't see what she could possibly contribute." The defense attorney crossed his arms, a faint smile on his lips. "Perhaps something you missed, counselor." The judge motioned her to the stand. The microphone looked enormous before her. "Ms. Turner, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "Yes, sir." "You may proceed." Grace drew a breath. Her voice came out small but steady. "I was here the day of the accident. I was cleaning the north corridor, near the room where it happened." The room went still. "Go on," the judge urged. She described the sound she'd heard, the slam of the door, the muffled cry no one took seriously. She spoke of a man in a dark suit hurrying by, the briefcase he dropped, and the page that got stuck beneath the cart's wheel. No fancy words, just what she remembered. And with each sentence, something shifted in people's faces. The prosecutor started squirming in his chair. "Are you insinuating my client wasn't alone at that time?" "I didn't insinuate anything, sir. I said what I saw." The defense leaned forward. "What else did you see, Grace?" She hesitated for an instant, then looked straight at the judge. "I saw someone trying to hide the truth." A murmur rose from the gallery. The judge's gavel brought the room to order. Grace didn't flinch. She kept going. She spoke about the file that vanished the next morning, about a conversation between two attorneys in the corridor, about how everything seemed carefully forgotten. With every word, her voice changed. Shyness gave way to conviction. It was as if, after years of cleaning the remains of other people's days, she was finally cleaning something inside herself. When she finished, the silence was absolute. The judge leaned forward, surprised. The prosecutor stared at his papers as if hunting for a printed explanation. The defense lawyer simply closed his eyes, like a man who knows something deep has just taken place. Grace lowered her head, folded her hands, and waited. She didn't ask for applause, didn't expect praise. She only wanted the truth to finally have a clean place to rest. And in that moment, without being told, part of the audience stood. Then the jury. Then the judge himself. It wasn't protest or protocol. It was respect. The woman who had always been invisible had just restored dignity to everyone there. Grace looked around and saw something she had never seen before: attentive faces, misted eyes, disarmed hearts. An entire courtroom, in silence, recognizing that sometimes the simplest voice is the one that most needs to be heard. Grace left the courthouse that day on trembling legs. The sun felt different, heavier, as if the whole city had stopped to watch her. But no one did. People moved on with their papers, their appointments, their coffees. Life continued, and she became invisible again. Only inside, something had changed. The feeling of having told the truth was strange, almost sore, as if she had opened an old wound. She crossed the parking lot slowly, the sound of cars echoing like hurried breaths. In her pocket, the envelope was still there, folded, creased, but now it felt lighter. Inside was a letter that had never been sent. A letter written by someone who believed no one would listen. That night, seated at the small kitchen table, she opened the window and let the wind in. The apartment was simple, with colorless walls and furniture that looked like it had lived many lives before hers. On top of the fridge, an old photo showed a boy with bright eyes, maybe 8, smiling beside a man in a suit. The boy was her son. The man, the husband who had disappeared years earlier, leaving only promises and debt. Grace picked up the photo, ran her finger over her son's face, and whispered, "I did what I had to, my love." Then she set it back down and sat in silence, watching the envelope on the table. She remembered the day it began. A gray Tuesday afternoon, like most of them. The courthouse was crowded, and the case of the day involved a powerful businessman, the same Mr. Sloan she'd seen that morning. Grace was cleaning the corridor when she heard a noise. A woman's shout, short. She ran to the door, but someone locked it from the inside. She knocked. No one answered. Minutes later, a man stepped out, straightening his jacket, and tossed a crumpled paper into the trash. Grace picked it up. It was a letter. The words were smudged, but she could read enough. A woman asking for help, saying she was being forced to lie. Grace kept the paper, not knowing what to do. The next day the woman vanished from the courthouse, and the case was hurriedly closed. The businessman walked free, and Grace kept the paper. For weeks, she thought of throwing it away, but something inside said she couldn't. She couldn't say why. She only knew that letter belonged to the truth, and truth, sooner or later, always finds a crack to slip through. Years passed. Grace kept cleaning floors, overhearing conversations not meant for her, catching glances not meant for her eyes. She became part of the furniture. And the more invisible she became, the better she learned to listen. She saw judges' moods change depending on the defendant, saw lawyers play with lives like cards in a deck. And she saw, too, the weight in the eyes of those judged for having no one to defend them. One morning, while cleaning the archive room, she found a folder with the same case name. Inside, only blank pages. And at the bottom, a yellowed sheet, the rest of the letter. The signature matched the missing woman. Now everything made sense. She understood that the innocent man had been condemned, and the real culprit had slipped away. From that day on, Grace watched more closely. Every detail, every conversation, every glance. She stored what she could in memory, but told no one. She was afraid. And yet, she knew the past would return. It did, when the case was reopened after an anonymous tip. She heard Mr. Sloan's name and felt her heart race. The same man. The same confident look. The same smile of someone who believes the world will never change. In that instant, she knew it was time to use what she had kept for so long. She took the envelope, placed both pages inside, and waited. She didn't seek a lawyer, didn't warn anyone. She just waited for the right moment. Looking back now, she understood, speaking out loud had been harder than carrying the secret. But it was also freeing. For the first time, she felt the floor she cleaned every day wasn't the same. It was the floor where the truth had walked. The next morning, she returned to work. Same room, same bench, same people. Only this time, as she entered, a few faces turned toward her. A guard gave a small wave. A secretary smiled discreetly. Small gestures, almost imperceptible, but heavier than any word. Grace smiled back, shyly. She wiped the counter, straightened the papers, filled the spray bottle. The sound of cloth against glass was the same as always, but now it felt like music. Somehow, the room remembered too. While she worked, she overheard two lawyers whispering about her testimony. One said, "I've never seen anything like it." The woman barely spoke, and it felt like the whole world was listening. The other replied, "Yeah, I guess no one expected a cleaner to be the turning point." Grace kept working. She didn't need recognition. She already had what she'd sought, peace. Judge Morales passed through the corridor and paused when he saw her. His tired eyes met hers. Neither spoke. The look was enough. At the end of the day, she put away the cart, turned off the lights, and walked out slowly. On the last stair, she looked back. The courtroom was empty, but it felt lighter. And for the first time, Grace felt she belonged there, not as someone who cleans the floor, but as someone who had cleared the room's very soul so the truth could breathe again. In the days that followed, Grace Turner's name began to echo through courthouse corridors as a story impossible to ignore. No journalist could quite explain what had happened. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a new crime. There was no blood, no shouting, and yet everyone wanted to know more about the cleaner who, with a handful of words, had shifted a verdict. Judge Morales tried to keep the docket moving, but his gaze carried a different weight. The reopened case was under review by a new team, and each page read like a quiet plea for forgiveness. Mr. Sloan, the man in the expensive suit, vanished from the news, and his company started to crumble under its own lies. Truth, like dust in the air, always found a gap to get in. Grace, meanwhile, didn't change her route. Same bus, same corner, same side door into the courthouse. Only now there was a new kind of silence, no longer indifference, but respect. When she walked by, voices dipped. Some people even stopped what they were doing, not out of curiosity, but because of a feeling they couldn't name. In the staff break room, a colleague offered her coffee. Grace declined with a smile. She was tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes with lightness. While cleaning the main entrance windows, she saw her face reflected in the glass. The same face, the same eyes. But something was different, serenity. She thought of her son, now grown, living in another city, working as a mechanic. They hadn't spoken in months. She took out her phone, hesitated for a few seconds, and wrote, "Hi, son. I think today you'd be proud of me." No reply came right away. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and kept working. That afternoon, Judge Morales called her quietly into his office. Grace stepped in slowly, unsure what to expect. He stood, removed his glasses, and rested his hands on the desk. "Ms. Turner, I wanted to thank you in person." She lowered her head, shy. "I only said what I saw, sir. Sometimes that's what the world needs. People who say what they saw, even when no one wants to hear it." The silence that followed was long, but comfortable. He opened a drawer, took out an envelope, and slid it toward her. "This is only a symbol, but there's a support fund for long-serving staff. I thought it right that you be the first to receive it." Grace looked at the envelope without touching it. "That's not why I spoke, Your Honor." "I know," he said gently. "But when justice is true, it should reach those who do good." She smiled faintly, took the envelope, thanked him, and left. In the corridor, she opened it. Inside was a handwritten note, for the one who reminded us that truth lives where we least expect it. Grace tucked that paper beside the old letter, in the same folded envelope that had been with her for years. The next day, something different happened. As soon as she entered the courthouse, someone started clapping. Then another. In seconds, the sound swelled. Staff, lawyers, guards, everyone applauded, smiling. She stood still, unsure what to do. A tear slipped free before she could stop it. Applause wasn't common here. That sound, in a place of tight jaws and hurry, felt almost like a miracle. Grace bowed her head, wiped her eyes with the same cleaning cloth, and said only, "Thank you." Days passed, and the courthouse returned to routine. but nothing was exactly the same. People began to speak softer, to listen more. Judge Morales stopped cutting off witnesses. Prosecutor Reed started double-checking each argument before he spoke. And jurors now seemed to look into the eyes of those who took the stand, as if searching for humanity before evidence. One evening, during the night shift, Grace found a young intern sitting alone in the corridor, eyes red. He apologized for being there, but she came closer and asked what was wrong. He confessed he'd made a mistake in a case file and feared being fired. Grace only smiled and said, "Sometimes it's in the mistake that we learn the value of truth. Just don't hide it. Tell your boss. Explain. The truth cleans what fear stains." He nodded, wiped his tears, and thanked her. When he left, Grace looked down at the floor. The reflection of the ceiling lights trembled on the newly polished tiles. It was beautiful how something so simple could shine when well cared for. At the end of that night, as she put the card away, she took out the envelope once more. 2 letters now lay inside, the old one, which had exposed an injustice, and the new one, written by the judge. 2 different stories joined by the same purpose, to remember that truth can be born from silence. Grace slipped the envelope into her bag, turned out the lights, and took one last look at the empty courtroom. The echo of her steps sounded like a prayer. Outside, the wind blew softly, and the stars winked in the windows as if in approval. Life would go on as usual, but inside each person who had been in that trial, something had changed forever. The next morning, the city felt different. The local paper ran a small note on the back page: "Courthouse employee helps reopen case and exposes system failures." No headline, no photo, just a few discreet lines, but anyone who read them felt there was something special there. Some kept the paper, others showed it at the cafe. It was as if Grace's story had spread without noise, carried only by the gentle weight of truth. Grace woke early, as always. Made coffee, listened to an old melody crackling on the radio, and opened the curtains. Sunlight brushed the windows of her building. A cat crossed the courtyard. Everything was simple, quiet. But inside, a different peace was spreading. Not pride. Ease. While she drank her coffee, the phone rang. Unknown number. For a moment, she thought of letting it go, but something made her answer. "Hello?" A hesitant male voice on the other end. "Is this Miss Grace Turner?" "Yes." "Who's speaking?" "This is Michael Barnes from the Saintbridge Daily. I'm writing about Mr. Sloane's case. I heard that you..." She cut in gently. "I have nothing to add, Mr. Barnes. Everything I could say, I already said in court." "I understand," he said quickly. "I just wanted to say thank you. We spend our lives hearing stories of corruption and despair. It's good to write one about courage." Grace smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Courage is too big a word for me, Mr. Barnes. I only told what I saw." He tried again. "Do you have any idea how many people talked about your testimony?" "They say the judge..." "Sorry," she interrupted, calm. "I need to get to work." She hung up before the silence could change her mind. She put on her uniform, tied her hair, and left. On the bus, passengers sat quietly with their thoughts. Grace looked out the window. People on the street seemed slower, perhaps because she herself was seeing with different eyes. a father crossing the road holding his daughter's hand, an elderly man reading a folded paper, a woman trying to juggle her groceries and her umbrella. Small gestures, small battles. At the courthouse entrance, she greeted the guard at the door. He smiled back. "Good morning, Ms. Turner." She answered in the same tone. "Good morning, Robert." Robert had never remembered her name before. She stepped into the main room and began her routine. Damp cloth on the railing, the gleam of the windows, the bucket filling. But now the courthouse seemed to breathe with her. Laughter was heard, muted, in the corridors. People exchanged small kindnesses. A place long ruled by tension was learning, slowly, to be human. While she mopped near the witness stand, something bumped her shoe. A crumpled paper. She picked it up, unfolded it, and read a single handwritten line. "Thank you for reminding us that right still exists." No signature. Grace slipped it into her pocket, warmth rising in her chest. At lunchtime, she went to the square in front of the courthouse. She sat on a bench, unwrapped her sandwich, and watched people pass. Then she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Mom?" She turned slowly. Her son, Andrew, stood there, taller, thinner, a face carved by years of work. He wore a grease-stained uniform, hands still dirty. Grace stood, eyes filling. "Andrew, my boy." He hugged her without a word. They stayed like that for long seconds, just feeling time pass. "I saw your name in the paper," he said, voice thick. "I knew it was you." Grace smiled. "I thought you didn't read the paper anymore." "I didn't. But this one, someone showed me. At the shop, everyone talked about it. They said, 'This woman is a hero.' And I thought, that woman is my mother." She laughed softly. "I'm no hero, Andrew. I just did what was needed. Sometimes that's what heroes do, Mom." They talked for hours. About everything, his childhood, the husband who left, the hard years. Grace told him about the testimony, the fear, the courage, the silence. Andrew listened without interrupting. When she finished, he held her hand. "I should have been here. You're here now. That's what matters." That day they went home together. The apartment felt fuller, though it was the same. She made soup, he fixed a broken chair. They laughed like they hadn't in years. Night fell, and the world outside felt far away. In the days that followed, letters arrived. Some from the courthouse, others from people she had never met. Short messages, full of gratitude. "You inspired me to tell the truth. Your story reminded me I have a voice too. You gave me courage." She read them all, kept some, answered a few, always with sincerity. Truth always finds someone to speak it. One Saturday, an unexpected visitor came. Prosecutor Reed. He looked tired, more human than usual. "May I come in?" Grace hesitated, then nodded. He stood in the kitchen, taking in the simple room. "I came to apologize," he said. "I treated you like you didn't matter. But what you did changed a lot for me. I only did my job." "No," he said, shaking his head. "My job is to pursue justice. Yours was to remind me what it means." He placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small pendant shaped like scales. It belonged to my mother. She was a cleaner too. Grace was speechless. She pressed her hand to her heart and nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." "You don't have to call me Mr.," he said with a smile. "We're colleagues in justice now." When he left, she looked at the pendant for a long time. It glowed softly, as if carrying the light of the one who had worn it before. She put it around her neck and felt the good weight of memory. On Monday, a new trial began, a different case, another defendant, another story. But that morning, everyone seemed to act differently. Judge Morales greeted each staff member as he entered. The courthouse's silence now was one of respect, not fear. Grace watched from a distance, quietly, as she cleaned the floor. And then she saw something that made her smile, a young trainee, nervous, about to speak for the first time as a newly sworn attorney. The microphone shook in her hands. Her voice came out thin. From the corner, Grace caught her eye and gave the smallest nod, as if to say, "Breathe. You can do this." The young woman drew breath, steadied herself, and began. When the hearing ended, Grace was gathering stray papers when the trainee approached. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, shy. "I saw your testimony in the courthouse training video. They show it to all new staff." Grace lifted her brows. "They did?" "Yes. They said it's an example of integrity." Grace laughed, surprised. "Integrity is too big a word for me, dear." The young woman smiled. "No. It's exactly the right size." They stood in silence for a moment, then the young woman left. Grace returned to work, heart lighter. In the days that followed, life went on. The courthouse found its rhythm again, and the world moved forward. But something was different in every corner. People looked at one another more. Respect had moved back in. One afternoon, after hours, Grace sat alone in the empty room. The distant tick of a clock marked time, and the sun poured through the windows, gilding the polished floor. She looked at the witness stand, the same place where she had once trembled, and smiled. She thought about it all, the nights she doubted herself, the times she swallowed words because she thought they didn't matter. Now she knew, every kept silence had built the moment when she finally could speak. Grace stood, ran a gentle cloth over the wood, and whispered, "May this place stay clean, not just on the outside." She left without looking back. The courtroom was silent, but it pulsed with something alive. Once spoken, the truth never goes dark. Time passed. The case she had helped set right became part of the city's story. Some still remembered, others repeated it like an urban legend. A simple cleaner changed a verdict and made a judge cry. For Grace Turner, it became a memory kept with the same care she gave the courthouse, without vanity, without noise, only with a quiet love. 2 years went by. The Saintbridge courthouse stood strong, now more modern, with new staff, new rules, and, somehow, a different spirit. It felt as if the building breathed another air. People greeted one another more, laughter showed up without guilt. It was as if Grace's words still echoed in the walls, reminding everyone that justice isn't only a sentence, it's compassion. Grace was still there, faithful to her routine. She arrived early, before the first footsteps rang down the corridors. Sometimes she paused at the witness stand, noted the glow of the wood, and remembered how her hands had shaken. Now she felt only calm. One day, while cleaning the main floor, she heard hurried steps behind her. Judge Morales, grayer now, walking more slowly. "Ms. Turner, how are you?" She smiled. "As always, Your Honor. Cleaning what life leaves behind." He laughed. "If everyone had your care, I might have fewer cases to judge. Or more time to see the people," she answered simply. He fell silent for a few seconds, looking at her with genuine admiration. "You keep teaching me without a robe, Grace." She only dipped her head and returned to work. That afternoon, the courthouse was hosting a special event, a lecture on ethics and humanity and justice. Judges, lawyers, students, everyone gathered. Grace, as always, was assigned to set up the room. She arranged chairs, adjusted the microphone, filled glasses of water. The coordinator asked her to stay close to make sure all was in order. When the lights dimmed and the audience settled, Judge Morales took the stage. He spoke about the power of small actions, about how a simple gesture can change how we see the world. Then, suddenly, he said her name. 2 years ago, a woman reminded me that justice begins when we stop looking at titles and start seeing people. The audience went still. Grace, standing at the back, felt her heart race. "That woman is here," he continued. "She works with us every day, cleaning the floors we walk on." But what she cleaned in this courtroom that day was far greater, the dust covering our consciences. The crowd rose in applause. Grace tried to step back, but the judge motioned her forward. She walked toward the stage, hands trembling. The sound of clapping filled everything. "Ms. Turner," the judge said, offering his hand, "this courthouse owes you a debt." She shook her head, moved. "You owe me nothing, Your Honor. I only want this place to stay clean, inside and out." He smiled. "That's exactly what you've done." The applause rose again. Someone called, "Say something." And she, still surprised, brought the microphone to her lips. "I've never been good with words," she began. "I always thought my role was to clean what others left behind. But over time I learned we all have to clean something, sometimes the floor, sometimes our own hearts." Silence. Complete. What I did that day wasn't courage. It was just necessity. Lies are heavy, even when they aren't ours. I just didn't want to carry that weight anymore. Some wept. Others bowed their heads. Grace returned the microphone, thanked them, and stepped down. As she passed the judge, he murmured, "You've just given the most beautiful lecture of my career." After that, life returned to normal. But something deep had changed for good. Grace's story began to be told in colleges, in ethics trainings, and even in short documentaries. She kept turning down interviews, always saying the same line, "I'm not the news." The truth is, one spring morning, she arrived earlier than usual. The corridor was empty and still. On the witness stand, she found a small note left on the wood. She recognized the judge's handwriting. "Dear Grace, if one day I'm no longer here, know this, your voice carried farther than any sentence I ever wrote. Morales." Grace placed the note in the old envelope, now thick with letters, papers, memories. It felt as if every piece of that story had come together to form something larger, a living testimony that truth survives time. The courthouse opened its doors, and routine began again. Footsteps. Chair legs. Glasses clinking. Everything the same, and yet different. Grace cleaned with her usual care, but now there was purpose in every motion. One day, as she left, she saw a schoolgirl standing outside, staring at the building. The girl held a notebook to her chest. Grace walked over. "Everything all right, dear?" The girl nodded. "My dad says you work here. He's a lawyer. He says he hopes I'll be like you someday." Grace laughed, surprised. "Like me? But I only clean the floors." "He says you clean what nobody sees," the girl replied with a smile. "And that's what makes the world better." Grace was left without words. She knelt and set a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Then if you ever want to change the world, start like this. See what others ignore." The girl waved and ran to the car. Grace stood there, watching it turn the corner. A light wind riffled her gray hair. In the months that followed, she chose to retire. She filled out the form, turned in her keys, and said goodbye to each room like an old friend. Judge Morales organized a small ceremony. Staff, lawyers, even former jurors showed up. "Grace Turner," the judge said, "you are not merely part of this courthouse. You are its conscience." She tried to answer, but her voice failed. She only smiled and nodded. She received a simple plaque bearing her name. The next morning, no alarm rang. She drank her coffee slowly, opened the window, and breathed the day in. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't in a hurry. She sat at the table and opened the envelope with all the letters. She read them, quietly, until she found the oldest, the smudged letter that started it all. The woman who wrote it was never found, but her words were still alive. Grace picked up a pen and wrote on the back, "Truth doesn't disappear. It waits." She folded the paper and slipped it back into the envelope, now complete. By late afternoon, she walked to the courthouse one last time. The building shone in the sun, windows reflecting the sky like mirrors. She set her hand on the wooden door and whispered, "Thank you for letting me be part of this." Then she turned away and walked down the sidewalk without looking back. A few days later, the courthouse unveiled a plaque in her honor. In memory of Grace Turner, she cleaned the floor and lit the truth. And so, in the city of Saintbridge, whenever sunlight slides through the courtroom windows and shimmers across the polished floor, it feels like something more is there, an invisible touch, a quiet presence. They say it's the echo of a simple voice, reminding everyone that justice, above all, is made of people. Years passed. Saintbridge grew, new buildings rose, but the old courthouse stayed right where it had always been, steady, quiet, weathered by time, its morning light glinting on polished windows. Some stories do not die, they change shape, find new faces, new voices. Grace Turner's was one of those. Today, anyone who enters the courthouse sees, in the main hall, a small brass plate. Almost discreet, yet impossible to ignore. In memory of Grace Turner, she cleaned the floor and lit the truth. People pause for a second as they pass. Some smile, others breathe deeper. That line makes them think. Grace's son, Andrew, is a different man now. After his mother retired, he decided to study again. He left the shop for a while and took one course, then another. He worked by day and studied at night. It was hard, but he kept remembering his mother's words, "Truth doesn't disappear." It waits. Now, he wears a different uniform. Stitched in small letters across the back, maintenance, Saintbridge Courthouse. The same place that once judged, wept, and learned was now his home too. On the morning he started, Andrew stopped at his mother's plaque. He touched the cool surface and murmured, "I did it, Mom. I'm here." He walked in slowly, breathing the familiar scent of waxed wood. Every step felt like a reunion. In the distance, he could almost hear the bucket's thud, the cloth gliding, his mother's soft humming. The guard greeted him with a nod. "So you're the new Turner. Welcome back to the House of Truth." Andrew smiled at the nickname. "Yeah, I guess I am." He began upstairs, the floor his mother used to care for. Something caught his eye. On Judge Morales' desk, an open folder. Inside, an old photo, his mother in uniform, holding a bucket, and beside her, the judge himself. Beneath it, a handwritten dedication, to remember that the heart of justice lives in those who believe in it. Andrew closed the folder carefully. He knew it wasn't just a keepsake. It was a living reminder of what she'd left behind. That afternoon, while collecting trash, he heard a soft crying in the corridor. He followed it and found a young woman on a bench, teary-eyed, an envelope crushed in her hands. "You okay?" he asked. She looked up. I've been called to testify. I'm scared to speak. Scared I'll mess up. That no one will believe me." Andrew sat beside her. "My mother was scared too, you know," he said, studying the floor. She thought her voice was too small. But she spoke anyway. The girl watched him, curious. "What happened?" He smiled. The world listened. The silence that followed was light, full of meaning. The young woman drew a breath, wiped her eyes, and stood. "Thank you. I think I needed to hear that." He nodded. "When you go in there, say what's true. The rest will sort itself out." When she left, he looked up at the ceiling and, without noticing, smiled. It felt like his mother's voice still drifted through the halls. That same day, the courthouse was packed. A new trial was drawing the town's attention, a case against a local company for unfairly firing workers. Judge Morales, close to retirement, presided. Prosecutor Reed was there too, calmer now, more seasoned. And in the gallery, quietly in the last row, the young witness, Andrews, waited to be called. When her name was announced, she walked to the center of the room. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. She told what she knew, in detail, without flair. She spoke from the heart. As she spoke, something shifted. The public fell silent. The judge leaned forward. The prosecutor lowered his gaze. For a moment, everyone was transported back to that day years before, when a cleaner spoke and changed everything. When she finished, the young woman stepped away, shaken but proud. Morales adjusted his glasses and said simply, "The court thanks your courage." The verdict came by late afternoon. The company was ordered to make amends and take the workers back. Outside, the sun painted the courthouse windows gold, as if sealing what was right. Watching from afar, Andrew realized the same witness stand, where his mother once shook with fear, had become a symbol of hope. Without thinking, he whispered, "She's still cleaning this place, only from the inside." Time kept moving. Judge Morales retired, Prosecutor Reed began teaching at a university, and new faces filled the courthouse. But on their first day, each one was told the story of Grace Turner. Her name became lesson, example, living memory. A modest portrait hung in the main corridor. Beneath it, the line she had said years earlier. Truth always finds someone to speak it. One day, many years later, Andrew received a letter with a government seal. Inside, an invitation, National Ceremony of Civic Merit, posthumous recognition for Grace Turner, for exemplary contribution to public integrity. He read it in silence for a long time. Then he looked up at the sky and whispered, "Mom, I think the whole country can hear you now." At the ceremony, the auditorium was full. Politicians, judges, ordinary citizens. On the stage, an empty chair with a bouquet of white flowers. When her name was called, Andrew walked up with steady steps. "Today we honor someone who showed the world that justice lives not only in laws, but in people," said the presenter. The audience rose in applause. Andrew held the plaque with trembling hands. He couldn't speak at first. He drew a breath and said only, "My mother always said the truth waits. I think it waited for this moment." Silence. Then a long applause, the kind that doesn't end quickly. Afterward, Andrew walked to the courthouse, at night. The building was closed, so he sat on the steps and looked at the stars. A soft wind moved through, carrying the distant hum of the city. For a second, he thought he heard light footsteps inside, the drag of a bucket, a cloth sliding across the floor. He smiled. He knew it was only the wind. Or maybe not. That night, he wrote a letter and left it by his mother's plaque. "You weren't just a cleaner, Mom. You were the woman who cleaned justice's heart. And if anyone asks who changed the world, I'll say, the one who had the courage to be honest when no one else was." He folded the paper carefully and walked away. The next morning, sunlight crossed the courthouse windows and fell on the shining floor, lighting up the forgotten letter. The guard found it, read it in silence, and set it beside the plaque. Since then, everyone who enters sees them together, Grace's name and her son's words. And, from time to time, when the courthouse is empty and the echoes fade, they say you can hear a soft voice, almost a whisper. Truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to remain. And that is how the story of Grace Turner goes on, not in newspapers, not in courtrooms, but in the small decisions people make every day, when they choose what's right even when no one is watching. The years went on, and the Saintbridge courthouse became more than a building, it became a symbol. People no longer called it just the courthouse, but the house of truth. Every new employee or judge who arrived first heard a story, told almost like a rite, that of a simple woman who spoke when no one else dared. Schools began bringing students to visit. In the main corridor, a guide pointed to Grace Turner's portrait and said, "She taught us that a person's worth isn't in the clothes they wear, but in the truth they carry in their heart." The children went quiet, curious. Some asked if she was still alive. The guide smiled. In a way, yes. Because it was true. Her spirit lived there, in every corner. In hurried footsteps, in low voices, in the care given to a clean floor. Everything had more respect, more purpose. Andrew still worked there, now with gray hair and time-worn hands. He never sought a promotion, never wanted to be anything else. He told everyone, My job is to keep what my mother began, to leave this place clean, inside and out. One day, he was buffing the corridor when a young woman approached, arms full of papers. "You're Turner, right?" she asked. "Depends. If it's praise, that's me. If it's complaints, it's the other Turner in the basement," he said, laughing. She laughed too. "I'm a journalist. I'm writing about your mother's legacy." Andrew paused, cloth in hand. "It's been so many years, and you still want to talk about her?" "She's part of history," the woman replied. "The case she helped change inspired a wave of judicial reforms. People should remember it all began with a simple witness." He looked at the polished floor. She hated being called a hero. She said she just told what was right. And maybe that's what makes her one. The journalist lifted a small recorder. "One question. What message do you think your mother would leave for this generation?" Andrew took a long time before answering. "I think she'd say, justice begins when you decide to look someone in the eyes." The woman clicked the recorder off, moved. "Thank you, Mr. Turner." "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank the truth. It does the heavy lifting." A few months later, the article ran. The title was simple: "The Woman Who Cleaned the Courthouse and Let Justice Shine." It went viral. People in different countries commented, shared, wrote letters. The world seemed to rediscover the power of a sincere voice. An international network produced a documentary. It showed old photos, newspaper clippings, snippets of testimony. At the end, the narrator said, "Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't to shout, but to remain standing when the world wants you silent." Andrew watched alone, at home. When it ended, he turned off the TV and sat in stillness. Heart tight, but light. He looked at his mother's portrait on the wall and whispered, "You're still teaching the world, Mom." Time passed again. The courthouse aged, but never lost its shine. Grace's portrait remained, and every day a new flower appeared at the base of her plaque. No one knew who left them, but everyone respected them. It felt like the whole city cared for her. A harsh winter hit Saintbridge. Snow blanketed the streets, the courthouse nearly deserted. Andrew, now retired, visited once a week, just to make sure everything was in order. On one visit, as he cleaned the plaque's glass, he noticed a new inscription engraved at the bottom in small letters. "Truth doesn't need power. It needs courage." He smiled. Probably someone from the new generation had it added. What he didn't know was that the line came from an old letter, forgotten in the archives, one of Grace's last written words. The following spring, the courthouse underwent major restoration. During the work, a small compartment was found behind the witness stand. Inside, a rusted tin. They opened it and found papers wrapped in old cloth. Grace's notes, lines, thoughts, small reminders of faith. One read, "I wasn't born to be heard. I was born to see. And whoever sees what is right cannot pretend they didn't." Those words found their way into books, lectures, and social media. They became a kind of mantra for people in justice work. Above all, they reminded everyone of the essential: truth doesn't depend on who says it, but on the purity with which it is said. Years later, when Andrew could no longer walk on his own, a young intern brought him to the courthouse one last time. He moved slowly, leaning on a cane, eyes shining. "It's been a while," he said. "I almost forgot the smell of this place." She helped him sit on the same bench where Grace had spoken years before. He looked around and smiled. "It's clean, huh?" "It always will be, Mr. Turner." He closed his eyes for a moment. "My mother would be happy." Outside, the city lived on. Children laughed in the square, bells rang in the distance, and the courthouse caught the light of late afternoon. Time could carry away everything, faces, voices, memories, but not what Grace Turner had left. Because some stories don't end. They spread, cross generations, change those who hear them. And in Saintbridge, whenever someone rises to tell the truth, the whole courtroom seems to lean in, silently respectful, as if an unseen presence were still there, watching, smiling, and whispering. Truth always finds someone to speak it. That night, Saintbridge lay wrapped in a light mist, and the city lights flickered like small promises. The courthouse, imposing and quiet, seemed to hold the world's breath. Andrew, tired, watched the street's shadows from his bedroom window. The breeze carried the scent of oncoming rain. He thought about all he'd lived. How a simple woman, with calloused hands and a luminous soul, had changed not only her own life, but the hearts of everyone she touched. A gentle knock at the door. Emily, his 10-year-old granddaughter, eyes bright, a notebook in her hands. "Grandpa, I have to bring an essay to school tomorrow," she said, settling beside him. "The theme is the hero who changed the world." He smiled, weary but happy. "Have you chosen yours?" She nodded. "Yes. It's about Great-Grandma Grace." A knot rose in Andrew's throat. "And what will you write?" Emily flipped through the notebook, excited. That she wasn't a hero with a cape or a warrior with a sword. She was someone who cleaned the floor so justice could walk with its head held high. He stayed quiet for a moment, eyes misting. "That's exactly right, my little one." She kept reading, voice soft. "My great-grandma Grace worked at the courthouse and one day told the truth no one wanted to hear. The judge cried. People changed. She taught that right is right, even if no one sees it. I want to be like her." When she finished, she looked up at her grandfather, who tried to hide his tears. "It's good, right, Grandpa?" "It's beautiful, Emily. The truest essay I've ever heard." She closed the notebook and lay her head on his lap. "Grandpa, does Great-Grandma still clean the courthouse from heaven?" Andrew laughed, wiping his eyes. "I think so. Only now she cleans people's hearts." Emily fell asleep there, and he stayed, gazing out the window, warmed by a peace he hadn't felt in years. The curtain swayed in the breeze like time itself was exhaling. The next day, the class listened to her essay in silence. Some kids laughed at first, a cleaner is a hero, but by the end, no one laughed. The teacher, moved, applauded, and the students followed. Emily won a prize for it, but the real prize came later, when the school created an annual award, the Grace Turner Prize, honoring those who do good quietly, without seeking recognition. News spread. TV segments, social media, local magazines. 10-year-old inspires award with story of great-grandmother who changed justice. Andrew watched and smiled. His mother's flame was alive, now in another generation. The following week, the principal invited Andrew to present the first award. In the auditorium, Children held signs that read, "Truth shines brighter than gold," and "Courage is saying what the heart knows." When he walked on stage to applause, it took him a few seconds to speak. "I used to think my mother had changed only a courthouse," he said. "Now I see she changed the world, one heart at a time." After the event, a reporter asked how it felt to see her story alive after so many years. Andrew answered, "Proud, of course. But more than that, responsible. Because when someone lights a flame, the rest of us have to keep it burning." That same night, he returned to the courthouse one last time. The doors were ajar. The guard recognized him and let him in. The lights were low, the echo of footsteps like an old memory. He walked to the center of the room, the very spot where his mother had stood before the judge long ago. He closed his eyes and heard, inside his own chest, her words, soft and steady, "Truth doesn't go out." He smiled, looked up, and whispered, "Mom, mission accomplished." The next morning, the courthouse woke different. On the main table, someone had left a single white flower. No one knew who, but everyone understood. It felt like Grace Turner had passed by once more, just to make sure the floor was still clean. Life kept moving. Emily grew up, studied law, graduated, and returned to Saintbridge as an attorney. On her first day in court, she brushed her fingers over her great-grandmother's plaque and whispered, "I'm here because of you." Colleagues called her the truth's advocate. Not because she was perfect, but because she never let anyone be silenced unfairly. She liked to tell them, "Justice doesn't begin with a law. It begins with a clean heart." And so, Grace Turner's legacy crossed generations. No headline ever matched what she left inside people, the certainty that a single act of courage can echo forever. Today, when sunlight hits the courthouse windows in Saintbridge, there's always a band of light that crosses the exact spot where she once stood. And they say that if the silence is deep enough, you can hear the gentle sound of a cloth sliding over the floor, soft, constant, eternal. The city moves on. The world changes. But truth remains, unshaken. And every time someone is called to testify, some feel a light shiver, as if an unseen presence stood nearby. Not in judgment, but in care. Because truth, when spoken with love, never dies. And Grace Turner, the simple woman who cleaned the courthouse floor, never stopped doing what she did best, keeping clear the path where justice must pass.